All right. How many of you found a new idea as part of this exercise? Raise your hand. That's really awesome. Great. How many of you thought that techniques we looked at in last session were useful in you thinking about new ideas? That's really awesome. Perfect. So let's get rolling with today's session. All right, so we're going to talk about developing plot today. So firstly, we'll cover general feedback from last session. So what are some of the themes that I observed? I would like to share those from continuous improvement perspective. And we will get into what is a plot. Today, when we talk about what is plot, you will develop a very clear understanding that if somebody says plot, what that person really means. Then we will look at plot versus events versus story. How are they different? And what do we really mean? And how they are related? Then we will look at plot devices. So these are devices that are used to make story move, right? Your plot move. So we will get into that. And then we will talk about homework assignment 3. All right. So here is some general feedback on assignment 2. First of all, really well done, everyone. Really enjoyed all of the ideas that you described there. I think most of you found new ideas as part of last um, assignment, right? So that's a great story. So a lot of things that we talked about last time, it seems like they worked really well for you guys. So great job there. Well done, everyone. So the other thing I would say that this part of the course, coming up with ideas, is very crucial for the success of this course. And here is why. So we are going to pick one of your ideas and then develop that as a full story. And like I defined the goal of this course, we are going to develop that as an unputdownable story. So it will appeal to most readers and they cannot put it down until they finish it, right? And the story is going to be a short story, so about 1,500 to 2,000 words. So unless you finish your assignment 2 and come up with ideas, it is going to be very difficult to leverage the full potential of this course. Now on to the feedback. So each story has to be unique in the universe of stories. So what that means is when you write a story, it needs to feel and seem like a unique story for a reader. So when reader is reading a story, he or she should not be feeling that, hey, I've read something like this earlier, or this is 70% of this is already explored, right? It's very important, right? Because some ideas are over-explored, right? And if you really want to work on those ideas, you really have to find uniqueness in how you're going to be dealing with that idea. Else your readers are going to be really having familiarity of that idea, and they're going to be leaving it midway or may not even pick it, right? You have to think about what is unique in your idea or in the theme that you're picking or in the plot that you're picking or the characters you're picking or kind of anything that you're going to reveal in the end that you're picking, right? So there has to be something unique about it, right? Now, while talking about this, I wanted to introduce you guys, for those of you who have not heard this term, it's called cliche, right? 90% of writing that happens, or even more, is a cliche writing, right? Where writers reap on ideas that have already been explored a number of times, right? When an idea came for the first time, it had a lot of value. It was awesome. For example, idea of time travel. In the beginning, when somebody came up with that, It was awesome. Maybe 10, 20, 100 stories were written on it, and maybe as many were really liked by readers. But then over a period of time travel has become more like a cliche, right? So you can read the definition here. So cliche is really an artistic element that has become so overused over time that it has lost its original meaning or effect on your readers or somebody you're talking to or whatever, right? And it has gone to a point where it even irritates the reader, right? Because every second guy is talking about time travel. Every second guy is talking about a portal opening somewhere, right? Traveling through a portal, or finding an object, which is magical, right? So all these ideas have been explored so much that they have become like cliches. So you have to be very, very, very particular about what uniqueness you're going to be bringing to these ideas if you are picking these cliches, if I may call them, right? And still want to write a story on them. It's totally fine still to have one of these as part of your story, but your story can't have these cliches as the main hook, right? Like in the movie Interstellar, they use idea of time travel and getting stuck in time, whatever time zone, time loop, whatever you want to call it. But that was not the main idea of the movie. The movie had a great plot, right? So just remember that. Now, there is a difference between a plot device and an idea, and we're going to talk about plot device a little bit later on. Like we said, you have to think about this, right? A character gets superpower or time travels or discovers a hidden portal. That's all okay. But then what, right? So at best, these things can be plot device, right? So these things can be background of your story, but they cannot be the main idea, right? Because then there is hardly any uniqueness there. So think about that. Sometimes what you find interesting, your readers may not. So that's another thing you should always think about. And I think in the first session, we talked about as a writer, you have to write and think like a reader, right? And read like a writer. So when you write like a reader, always thinking about your reader, not yourself, then you really experience them. You really understand when they're reading your novel or watching a movie, are they really excited? Or this is your own over infatuation with the subject or an idea, right? We all love things, right? You might love math a lot, but does every reader of yours be that interested in maths? So that's a question you need to ask yourself. So when you think about ideas, when you think about themes, plots, events, just think about your readers. Very important. Lastly, brainstorm to get as many ideas as you get to be able to have a choice, right? So the reason we asked for 3 ideas, even though we were going to develop only on one, was simple. The harder you think, the more ideas you get, and the more choice you will have to pick which one you want to spend time on. Time is very precious. As authors, if you become an author, you probably write 10 books, 10 novels, right? That's about average for an author. You really want to pick them. very selectively. And in order to write those 10 books, you think about 100 books, 120, or maybe 200 books. And then you drop 190 if you thought about 200 books, right? So you have to be very selective about ideas, and you can only do that when you keep brainstorming. So it was apparent in some of the assignments that sometimes it was only those three ideas that might have occurred to you and you listed them. Like, I wanted to take one idea from each one of you to develop it as a story, your story, and I asked for three ideas. Now when you think about this, you think about, oh, I need to come up with three ideas. Why don't I come up with like 5 or 6 or 10, and then I'm going to pick three out of them, right? Again, this is a light course. Even three are good, but it's more about how writers think, right? So always think about challenging yourself. Yeah, not giving up. Keep thinking. Don't be satisfied, right? So that is another observation I had here. All right. So let's understand what's a plot. So in a very simple term, I would say, imagine your friend just watched a movie and you don't want to watch that movie, right? You say, okay, I'm not that much interested in going to this movie, but I'm curious what happens in the movie. Then what your friend tells you is the plot of that movie. That's the simplest way of understanding a plot, right? Because your friend is going to tell you all the events in an order that it gives you joy of being a reader or listener, right? And all the events which are important. Your friend is going to skip events which are not important, right? So that's the plot. A plot is collection of events in a story that really move the story. That's it, right? Now, a plot doesn't include all the events, like I said earlier. If your friend is going to tell you a story, let's say Lion King movie story, your friend probably is not going to talk about that, hey, these guys sang a song together. Right? Definitely. So your friend is going to cover all of the plot within like 5 minutes, all the essentials, right? So the plot is not all the events. Plot includes the events which are moving the story. So how do you identify plot events? So when I say plot events, these are the events which comprise a plot, which is not all the events that happen in the story. So how do you identify those? Events are tied with cause and effect relationship in a plot. So the plot events are tied with cause and effect relationship, right? So there's always like, this happened, now as an effect of this will happen, right? And why plot is the most crucial part of the story in keeping reader always turning the pages without leaving it is precisely the same reason. Because these events give your reader that curiosity about what happens next. That's why plot is so important, right? And the other events that happen across the book, they're not necessarily part of the plot, but they are very useful in setting a background, giving you holistic idea about the story, making the story real for you, because it can't be just plot. It can't be just, hey, there was a king, the king died, and hence the queen died in grief. It can't be that. There has to be a lot more that has to happen to make it real for you. But the plot could be that simple, right? An example I have cited here is, I lost my best buddy yesterday, my dog, Benji. I'm sad and I don't feel like doing anything, right? It's a plot of a very small story. The next one, the plot events may not necessarily be in chronological order. So it's same example that I've given at the top, the person can describe, I'm sad and I don't feel like doing anything because yesterday I lost my best buddy, my dog Benji. So when I say sequence of related events, does not mean time sequence. It is often up to the writer to arrange these events in a way that works the best for the readers, that gives them the good amount of tension building and good amount of entertainment, right? So just understand that. Plot is not only about how you handle the events in your story, but how you hold the reader's interest, right? So there's a lot more to the plot. They're not just collection of events. It's also about how you structure them in the overall story, right? And obviously, there's subplots that come into play as part of that. The more engrossing a plot is, the more satisfied the reader is. So the more you can make plots such a way where reader is thinking what's going to happen next, obviously the reader is going to be more and more engaged and involved, right? So at every point, you need to ask yourself when you're writing, am I giving my reader enough to think about what's going to happen? Because if that's not happening, the reader is going to leave the book. It doesn't matter that, first 10 chapters were awesome. Next, like chapter 11 and 12 doesn't have much going. And then after that, it picks up. The readers may leave your book on chapter 11 or 12. So it is extremely important that you structure your plot in a way that it gives the reader that curiosity and tension as to what's going to happen next. All right. All right. Lastly, a plot is very often a very complex undertaking. What I mean by that is, if you do not handle your plot really well, then you run a risk of your reader coming out of your story and analyzing your plot, right? You don't want that. You don't want your reader to come out of your story and thinking about, why would this happen? Why would this particular event cause this to happen, right? And then you get into whole new world of thinking about genres, settings, right? For example, there's a real life and there is a life in your stories. You can depict about some sort of magical world, some sort of world which is unreal, which is different from our world. Now you cannot just rely on events to just communicate it's different. You have to give that experience to the reader, where reader is convinced that this world can happen, and the way you are unfolding events, the way your characters are interacting, it would be real in that world. Because if that doesn't happen, your reader is going to really come out of that world very quickly, or during various various pages of your novel or story or whatever, or various paragraphs, they will keep coming out of your story. You don't want that. All right, so I will pause here and take questions. Unmute yourself and ask me any questions you have on the assignment from the last session or on plot, because understanding of a plot is extremely important.
I read online that I'm writing a story that has a linear narrative, or like it doesn't have like it's told in chronological order, is like more, it's better, or it's like more rewarding, and then usually turn out better than like stories that are not told in chronological order. Is this true?
It totally depends. It totally depends on the subject you're dealing with, the genre, the plot, everything. It's a packaged experience. And I have plans to go into the time sequencing of stories in the later part of course, right? So,
Okay.
makes sense?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Essentially, if we use like the cause and effect relationship, and if we use it chronologically, would we use that type to write a story if we're trying to give like details? But if we use it in a non-chronological way, then are we trying to give some suspense in the story?
Yes. So that's a great question. And I would say that when we say cause and effect, it necessarily does not mean at the very atomic level for events, right? It can happen at any level you can imagine, right? It is from your reader's perspective, right? It may not really mean the real events as they happen. It may mean another level of events, another level of revelation you want to do with your reader, right? So in the end, it all goes back to how creatively writers can generate entertainment for their readers. And like I've said earlier in the course, there are no set rules in writing. It's the end product that really matters.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions? Okay.
What are ways to like improve your plot development chart?
Plot devices is a good way, right? So we will get into that and I'll talk more about that. That's one. As a writer, I would always say, think as a reader. And when we get into the plot devices, you will understand more about some techniques that help you develop a better plot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could explain, please, what exactly is wrong with like lingering questions or analyzing a plot? Because for example, in the Pearl, I feel like the reader has a lot of lingering questions and they kind of have to analyze the plot a bit, but it is still considered like a great piece of literature. So I'm still sorry. So I'm just wondering what the parameters maybe are for lingering questions and analyzing, and when does it become too much or when is it good?
So that's a great question. I would say there are readers who are more interested in something that really gives them food for thought. So they're looking more than real entertainment there. They're looking for something to think, something to go deeper in, right? While many other readers, they just look for good time, good 1 day or 2 days or few hours that they can really read a good story, enjoy it, and remember characters, remember events, but don't get into it from analysis perspective. Now, depending on what kind of reader you are, you tend to go to a different kind of literature, right? So if you are really into analyzing situations, you're still within the realm of entertainment, but you're more like, okay, what might have happened here, right? So you might end up picking books that leave you at cliffhanger, right? Where in the end, the writer leaves you with no clue as to what will happen or what eventually happened, right? Or if you really are into getting more insights into humans and human psychology and how humans really behave in relationships and things like that, you might want to get into a different kind of books, different kind of genres, right? So it all depends, and there is nothing wrong and right here. From perspective of this course, we are taking simpler approach. We are learning to understand all the elements of story writing. As you become writers, you will have a lot of choices. You will have choices of writing something that gives good entertainment for 3 hours movie, or you have a choice of writing something which is a study of human psyche, of a particular type of character, of particular type of condition, right? And still turn it into fiction. Now you will get very different readers based on what you're writing, right? And that's the choice you make as well. My take is that you should follow your heart, right? So rather than going by what the world wants, I would say understand what really moves your heart and pick that kind of genre. And then every genre has its own following. You will find readers in that genre. It's a long answer, but again, it's not black and white like many things in artistic world. Hopefully, the answer to your question was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So spending little bit more time on plot versus events versus story, because it's important. So I just made this up. Consider as this story with 7 events. Now that doesn't mean really that these are the only events that happen in the story. There are a lot probably happening in that story, lot of things are described. But from plot angle, just imagine these 7 events that are part of the story. So the queen is trying to find a cure for the king's unhappiness. So this tells you the king is always unhappy and the queen is trying hard to find a cure for it. Second event is the king's parents are worried. So if it's a movie, they might show you a scene where parents are worried and they're talking about it. Third event is the queen gives birth to a son thinking this may help. Fourth event is the king is not happy still. Fifth is while hunting. So if it's a movie, you see a scene where while hunting, the king meets a monk and engages in a dialogue about life. Sixth is a bad weather and storm makes it hard for the king to return from hunting. So while king is coming back from hunting, dark clouds, storm, pouring rain, all of that happens, lightning, but he comes back. Next day, the king renounces his kingdom and leaves. So it's a very simple example I just created for purpose of this course. If you look at this, when you tell this story to your friend, are you going to tell your friend about king's parents being worried? Or are you going to tell him that, hey, while he was coming back from hunting, the weather really turned bad? Probably not. So what you're going to tell your friend probably is everything except for event number 2 and 6, right? So in last 2 bullets, I've shown this story comprising of all the events. The plot really is 1, 3, 4, 5, 7. Now it might not be in that sequence all the times. So time sequence is a different conversation altogether. But from plot perspective, if you leave out king's parents being worried, there's no harm. If you leave out bad weather, there's no harm. But if you think about story, these two are important. The first one being, it really grounds the viewer or the reader into reality of it, right? It makes an impact. The family is worried, right? Bad weather is symbolic. A lot of stuff in movies that we see is symbolic because it helps create the tension. The symbolism is maybe here, maybe about, hey, something bad is going to happen, something that might not be liked, right? So think about all of that. So plot here is really collection of the events that move the story. You cannot skip any of those events when you're telling your friends about the book or the movie, right? You can talk about it in 5 minutes, but you have to talk about what is essential. So you can't skip any of 1, 3, 4, 5, 7. They're extremely important. All right. So now on to the common plot devices. So what is a plot device? Let's spend some time on that. So you know the plot now. You know the plot. Here are 7 events that comprise the plot. But actually, if you think about this more, what is really binding those events together? What is that, background theme that is making the plot come together, right? And making plot move from one event to other event, right? So in a way, plot device comes before the plot, but I wanted to talk about plot before plot devices here, right? So plot device helps you advance the plot, but it is generally across the plot, right? It's not about event to event what you're doing. It can be overarching your story or the plot, or it can be part of it, right? It can be overarching full story or just part of the story. So let's talk about them and you will understand that more. So here are some of the common plot devices that we can take a look quickly. A quest. A lot of movies, a lot of books have been written about a quest. The device that keeps the plot going in those movies is a quest. Somebody has to go somewhere on a mission to accomplish a goal, to find something, right? And that is always on the reader's mind as the reader is reading through the plot, through the story, right? So that is an important plot device. And a couple of examples here, I'm sure you guys can think tens of examples right now. There's so many movies, so many books have been written on quests. Finding Nemo is one example. So Nemo, as you all know, in the first movie, is lost. And Nemo's father starts on this quest of finding Nemo. That's where the title of the movie comes from. And then The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, another great movie, right? So think about more example where quest is a plot device, right? Then second one is called, and you don't worry about what they're called, to be honest. Just think about what they do. That's good enough. Artifact of Doom. Good guys need to destroy a magical object before it's used by a villain for evil. What could be a better example than Lord of the Rings, right? So we all know Ring has certain powers and it can actually control the world, but it also corrupts the person who has it, or at least has that power. So Frodo starts on the journey to destroy it, along with few others. The third one here is ticking time bomb. So this one puts the pressure on the reader, time pressure, so that tension is generated, right? So examples here would be, and I've purposefully not taken a lot of disaster slash, mission critical kind of examples here. I've taken examples from a number of areas just to bring the point that it is not always about a crisis. So ticking time bomb, plot device is not always about a disaster crisis or about somebody is going to die if you don't do it by this time. It's not always about that. A very good example is Hangover, right? Where these guys have, it's a comedy movie. These guys have to find Doug before his wedding, right? So imagine that kind of ticking time bomb setting. Then Titanic, it's not really about a clock running and everybody has to do something by 5 p.m. But it's about people getting frozen if something doesn't happen in certain time frame. And if you are watching that movie, your tension is probably the highest when the ship breaks, because you're thinking how these guys going to survive, because they're going to die in this cold water, right? Speed, obviously, you guys, some of you might have watched that movie. So again, there's a time by which things have to happen. And Armageddon is another movie where time is ticking. So understand that this device is used to build tension, where the clock is not really in your book, clock is in reader's head. The reader is more worried than the writer about what's going to happen. This one is a cliche. So love triangle, two people in love with the same person. There are probably more than 1,000 movies made on this. Now there's still movies that are made, and once in a while they become very critically acclaimed and famous. But one thing that you need to understand is, even though it is cliche, the treatment, the creative treatment, or the uniqueness of other things that writer brings in makes those movies great. Not them being a love triangle, right? No more. So when this concept came or emerged, plenty of movies, many of them became big hits. But then if you really plot the curve of how popular movies based on love triangle have been over time period, you will see that the curve is going to go down like this, right? Because it's a cliche, right? So to my earlier point, if you are choosing this plot device, you really have to find something unique that is the forefront of your work. This cannot be the big theme or big idea. The next one is Chekhov's gun. So this one literally comes from Chekhov, and what was said that if you show a gun in first scene, then you have to use that gun later on in that work. So if it's a movie, you show a gun in first or second scene, somewhere later on that gun will be used on somebody, right? If you really look at Harry Potter series, there are plenty of examples of this, right? There's something which is shown, which is later used, right? And there are plenty of examples everywhere of this, generally in detective novels, in mystery novels. An object is shown, which is going to be used later on, right? And it's a very effective device, because imagine in the first scene, if a gun is shown for 2 seconds, lying on the table in an office setting, the reader or the person watching the movie is always thinking, when is that gun going to be used? Because you planted that thing in the reader's mind, right? You're not going to show something like that for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. You may pass the camera, but you cannot fix camera on that thing for 2-3 seconds if it is not relevant to the story. So it's a very good device as well. And everything that we're talking here can have levels of abstractions, right? I would say one level of abstraction for this, maybe it's not an object, it's a situation. It's something else, right? So think about that. At a very, very deep level, it really means that you gave reader a quick preview of something and got reader thinking when it is going to turn into more clear, thing, right? What is going to happen with this, right? It could be a scene, a situation, idea. Generally, it is an object. Alibi. So I'm not going to talk about this a lot because you guys all know this. So this is a term which is used for showing an evidence or a proof that the person typically who is charged with a crime was not there. The person was somewhere else, right? And a lot of murder mysteries in old times were based on this. The movie would run, a lot of suspects, there's a prime suspect, everybody goes to the court in the end, and in the court, there's a good debate. In the end, the lawyer, the prime suspect, is able to prove that the person was not there at the scene of the crime, right? McGuffin. So this was made very popular by movies like Psycho. So what happens here is that a character pursues an object, even though the object's actual nature may not be important for the story. So in Psycho, you might remember everything takes place because of stolen money, right? So this girl steals money and she's trying to, run with the money, stays in this hotel. No, money is not at all important. If you have seen that movie, there's hardly any importance money has in this movie. Same thing about Pulp Fiction. Some of you might have seen that movie. I know it's probably PG-15, but in that movie, there's a briefcase that changes hands at times. Movie ends, you don't come to know what that object is all about. So that's MacGuffin setting, MacGuffin device, where you are keeping the reader engaged on something which is totally unimportant for the plot. All right. The red herring is used to divert the audience attention away from the something significant within the plot, right? It is used a lot, as you can imagine, in mysteries, thrillers, horrors, right? So the writer wants you to look at something else and then twist in a tale or big reveal, surprise, shock, right? That's possible. So this is very, very, very highly used in mysteries, thrillers, and horrors, as I said. And then a good example that you can identify with is this Harry Potter book where Sirius Black seems villain until the very end, when we discover that the villain was somebody else, right? So writer was very successful on making reader even believe to large extent that Sirius Black is the villain. the cliffhanger. So in this plot device, and this is obviously not overarching the entire story, this is overarching probably part of it around the end. I know we are at time here. If everybody's fine, 5 more minutes, or 10 more minutes actually. Those of you who want to drop can drop. We'll run quickly from here. So cliffhanger, you all know, in the end, the writer leaves you at a point where you're wondering what's going to happen. And it's used a lot in the series, right? So that you want to watch the next series or next episode in the series. Plot voucher is an object given to a character before they encounter an obstacle that requires the use of the object, right? So it could be a wand, it could be a ring, it could be something, it could be a dress for superhero, whatever, right? And suddenly it is used. Until it is used, its powers generally is not known. DX Machina connects the loose ends of an entire plot that brings them to resolution. A simple example might be Gandalf. So when it becomes very tense in Lord of the Rings, and we feel like nothing can happen, now it's like too bad. Gandalf comes and does something, says things right? So it's all the loose ends of the plots coming together for quick resolution, right? So that's this particular plot device. It does that. All right, so homework. So what I'm going to ask you guys is, now you guys have picked your stories. I had some comments in very few ideas. For very few ideas, I have said that consider doing this additional thing or consider picking up this idea, right? But I think all of you, most of you have ideas identified. So divide the plot events of a story sequentially under the 5 elements of the story structure, right? And I'll show you the template, right? The only thing I'm going to caution you, this is not a formula. You cannot constraint writing in a structure, right? If you go thinking that this is how you're going to write stories going forward always, it's not right. So I don't want you to feel that way. I don't want you to think that what we are learning now in session 3 is how you're going to develop stories going forward, right? And we'll get to that as we go in more sessions from here. But we're doing this right now to find an effective means for you to learn all aspects of a storytelling. At the same time, develop a good story, right? But this is typically not how it happens. This is typically not the most famous writers do it. This is typically not how I do it. Because if you set the plot in the beginning, you're basically making your story very predictable for your readers. Because if you can predict it in the beginning, this is exactly going to be the plot of my story, your readers can predict as well. And you're not empowering your characters. Like in the first session, I said that you should always let your characters be free and do what they want to do, right? And then figure out whether it's meaningful for your reader. So giving that freedom to your characters and giving that freedom to yourself to discover more situations that you can't in the beginning always. In fact, maybe not even 25, 30% of situations that you can think in the beginning, right? But at this point in the course, it's effective means to kind of expose you to all aspects of writing. So we start here, we continue developing, we continue applying all the devices and techniques, right? So I want to be very clear about that here, that this is not a formula. This is not something that I suggest that you always do as you become writers. Start here. utilize this technique, but this is one of the many techniques. And mostly when you become a good writer, you will not get hooked by or pre-decided by your plot, right? It evolves. So here is the template. Talk about story element. In the left of this table, you have story elements, structure of story. We talked about these 5 elements. And then on the right-hand side, list the events that are going to progress the story or the plot, right? So these events are really the events that will comprise the plot. So anything that you won't tell your friend when your friend says, tell me what this story is all about in 5 minutes. Anything that you won't tell your friend will not feature here because you're developing a plot. So on the right-hand side, second column of this table, when you put together all the events, those events are plot events. And then there will be more events as you start developing them into stories. And each row might have one or more than one events based on how your story is. So no constraints on exposition, for example, just having one, or rising action having only 2 or 1 or 3. Use as many events as you want in each one of these. Like I've always said, climax generally doesn't happen in the middle. So remember that, because this, if you think mentally, it seems linear, it seems like climax happens in the middle, but it generally happens toward the end. So with that, I'll take questions. If you have questions, unmute yourself. I'll stop sharing this template here.
I just have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So my first question is, could when we're writing the actual story, eventually, could we change some aspects that we had previously written into this template?
So yes, that's the whole idea. Your story when you end might be totally different from where you started. And that's the part that I want you guys to understand really well, that you cannot decide about your story, even 25% of it, right? When you start writing it, right? Because then you're making it predictable. The plot is going to be very predictable, right? So you have to let yourself be free in thinking, in changing aspects of your story. So it may be totally different when you end. It's just a tool to get you started, and it's a journey, right? Great question.
Sorry, can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm just in regards to writing stories. Okay, so sorry, I'll just have to give an example. So, for example, I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada, and I know that there are certain events that perhaps have affected the U.S., like 9/11. Would it be considered inconsiderate or insensitive to write about a topic from another country, or like even like Poland in World War II? Would that be considered insensitive to write about topics from countries where I'm not from?
Not at all. So writing fiction is awesome, first of all, because you can write about anything, period. So doesn't matter where you are from, doesn't matter what you want to write about. It's it's a very free form of art. Like any other form of art, it shouldn't have any constraints, right? So like we covered in the first session, don't worry about people judging you. Eventually some may, but you are creating something that most of the time doesn't reflect the way you think. It's all about how your characters think. Now your character might be one of the bad guys who did it, right? And the bad guy may survive and have fun in the end. Now you don't want bad guy to have fun. It's the story. So nothing is inappropriate here. Nothing is sensitive. as an artist, you can do anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Is it okay if you check the chat? I just sent you the link to my second assignment because I wasn't there for the last session.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to both assignment 1 and 2 and see if there are any assignments out there which are not corrected or checked. I'm gonna do all of them. Specifically on second one, I want all of you to write 3 ideas. So I saw a couple of assignments with only 1 idea. I didn't go into them on purpose because I really want you guys to think hard. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions you guys have? So if there are no more questions, we'll see you next time. 4th of July, next Saturday, we won't have a class. I wish you all happy Independence Day in advance. We will meet on July 11th next. All right. Well done, everyone. And I'll see you in the next class.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.